This is Leigh Steinberg on Sports. Leigh Steinberg, the pioneer of sports and entertainment, the world's preeminent sports agent. It's Sports USA's Leigh Steinberg on Sports.
Thank you for listening to and downloading Leigh Steinberg on Sports. You can find us on sportsusamedia.com, Podcast One, that's podcastone.com, on iTunes and the TuneIn app for your smartphone. I am Brandon, and let's welcome Leigh Steinberg to the show. Hi, Leigh.
Hello, Brandon, and hello to all our listeners. We're happy to have you with us.
Yeah, we want to lead off the show with breaking news in the world of Major League Baseball. Tony Bosch, he's the one who founded the company at the center of Major League Baseball's biogenesis scandal last year. He is expected to surrender to the Drug Enforcement Administration on charges of conspiracy to distribute anabolic steroids. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, this is the fella in Miami who really got everything rolling on this last flurry of steroid and supplement arrests. And I think they arrested 10 people today. They call it Operation Strikeout. And he faces up to 10 years in prison. He reached a deal to plead guilty for distributing the steroids between 2008 and 2012, but he had not surrendered, and so he did today. I have a strong point of view in terms of steroids in baseball, which is there can't be any player unaware of the fact it's against baseball rules. They know this. Instead of this graded up system where they go from X amount of games to a half a season to a season, I think that it ought to be one strike, and then after that you're out.
Now let's switch topics to Team USA basketball. Of course, by now you must know about the Paul George injury. Suffered a compound fracture of the right leg early in the fourth quarter during an intra-squad scrimmage game. Now, beyond his injury, Team USA just today made some cuts to kind of get down to that 12-man World Cup team. They let go of John Wall, Bradley Beal, and Paul Millsap. Now, go back to the injury with Paul George. What does that mean going forward for Team USA in the future?
It reminds me very much of a time in football where they played a college all-star game where the top collegiates came together prior to training camp, and then they played against the last NFL Super Bowl champion. And that game was eliminated eventually because there was a potential for injuries. The problem with this is that the players are not being paid. The teams do have a certain veto power over whether or not the players participate in the international competition. But the difficulty is this: there is no protection or guarantee when players go out to play basketball that they're going to be safe for what is considered to be a non-contact sport. Take someone like Mark Cuban. He's long been against his franchise players participating for just this reason. So is it a worthy goal that we compete against other countries? Yes. Should we have our best do it? Well, if we don't and we lose, then people get extremely agitated. But you're now seeing the consequence of what can happen in a situation like this.
Now, another reason why, to switch topics, another reason why to love the San Antonio Spurs, they hired WNBA San Antonio Stars star Becky Hammon as a full-time assistant coach. She's the second woman to ever coach in the NBA. Of course, the first was Lisa Boyer. She was the volunteer assistant for the Cleveland Cavaliers back in 2001-2002. Becky Hammon is going to retire after this season with the WNBA to be the assistant coach. Talk about what does that mean in the future for women as far as coaching in professional sports, especially the NBA? We've never had a head coach as a female. Do you think we're leaning towards that?
Well, let's get to the assistant coaches first,
Yeah,
because that's the pool that you draw head coaches from, and you don't have female coaches in the other team sports. Once these barriers fall, it's very much a case that a new paradigm gets instituted and people don't remember it. Can a woman coach basketball to males? Of course she can. Women teach males in schools. Women play a dominant role in people's lives. And here you got someone with all this experience in the WNBA. Remember, teaching and coaching is a different skill set. So the question is always, if someone's a great player, will they be a great coach? You start with that. Someone like a Magic Johnson, who coached very briefly, could never coach. You don't see the biggest stars by and large coaching. Why? Because they have such exacting standards and such little tolerance for people who don't live up to it, that they really aren't the best, most patient teachers that there can be. So a lot is resting on Becky Hammon's shoulders. We have a celebrity society today that consists of interesting people. I think she'll get heavy publicity and coverage for this and become a high-profile person herself. Well, like Jackie Robinson playing baseball, that creates a lot of pressure. I think it's very exciting. It's coming in the same year that we saw the first gay player drafted into the NFL. There are changes throughout. Jason Collins is the first NBA gay player. So societal changes are occurring everywhere. And here's the special advantage that a female coach could have. Men, by and large, tend to not share as easily as women do. And when we interact with women, very often that nurturing or female presence brings out a lot more honesty, a lot more willingness to not be defensive, and they could have real advantages in terms of their interplay with these players. So she's been named one of the WNBA's best 15 players of all time. She knows the game, and she'll learn in a really hospitable environment. So I think it's exciting.
Let's get into NFL training camp. Now, the Chicago Bears, big news. Artellus Bennett got into a scuffle with his teammate Kyle Fuller, the rookie there, and the team announced Tuesday it has fined and suspended Bennett. I mean, I doubt he's going to miss any of the regular season, but do you think what he did is warranted?
Look, let's remember what training camp is. Most of the country is sweltering in heat, and many of the teams pick the most obscure places to play. The teams experience enormous pressure to make the team. And football is a collision sport. If you really think about it, what's amazing is that these massive bodies will collide, or there'll be tackling going on, and they don't fight after every play. So
now, the Cincinnati Bengals, they have made 3 straight playoff appearances. Although they haven't gotten out of the first round, they've made 3 straight playoff appearances with their quarterback, Andy Dalton. Signed a 6-year, $115 million contract. What do you think of that signing right there?
Well, first of all, what I'd like our listeners to know when they hear a huge contract signed in the NFL is that player's not getting the total, which in this case was initially reported at $115 million, like in a check. Okay. Turned out the deal was still substantial, but it's $96 million for 6 years. So that's a $16 million average. But the way that usually happens is you get a signing bonus, and in this case it's $12 million. And then he's got a roster bonus next year in March of $3 million. So there's $15 million guaranteed. And that's the way you have to look at it. If he plays the first year, he's going to get that. And he probably is going to get the second year. But with only $15 million guaranteed, and I say only because there have been $30, $40 million bonuses in long-term quarterback contracts. With only that much, they can cut him without being destroyed under the salary cap. That hit would be $2 million a year on deferred bonus. That's the way it works. Divide the number of years that the contract covers into the amount of the signing bonus, and that will give you the figure that would come against the cap or be dead money in each of those years, and then you add the salary, all of which does that. So he had a year remaining on his contract. He was scheduled to make slightly less than $1.7 million. So let's look at it. I mean, he's been in the league 3 years. He had 3 10-win seasons, and he's been in the playoffs every year. That's a good thing. But they're 0-3 in the playoffs, and that's not a great thing. I remember there was controversy during last season for a spell about whether or not Dalton had the requisite skill set to be a franchise quarterback. Remember, we define that as someone a team can win because of rather than with, who they can build around for 10 to 12 years, and who can elevate the level of team play in adversity in critical situations to put the team on his back and take them through the playoffs of the Super Bowl.
Now, we are headed into the NFL first preseason game. Talk about what it's like coming into that for a player.
Well, you have 2 levels of players. You have veterans and you have rookies. For a well-established veteran, they're simply playing themselves back into shape. They're not worried about being cut. They're probably going to play a quarter, most starters in most teams' first preseason games, and then they bring in their backups. And that really is maybe the only chance those backups have to play all year, except if there's injury. For a veteran who's being challenged for his job, this becomes a very important showcase because the backups have the opportunity to play in these early games, and that player is a little bit on the hot seat. So his mindset is, I have to do it. It's everyone's mindset, but it's particularly that player. Now you have rookies. And again, let's put them into 2 categories. Those players that one would assume would start, high round draft picks, or someone who's particularly splendid in a 2nd or 3rd round. For those players, there's not an issue of being cut. They're not worried about their roster slot. But they are worried about being able to be the starter as opposed to sitting behind an aging veteran. And this is their first real exposure to NFL football. So let's say you're a quarterback in that position. The safeties and corners move in different ways than you're used to in college. The degree of separation between a wide receiver and a defensive back is smaller. The G-force at the line of scrimmage, the hitting, is much more intense. The complexity of the playbook and what they have to master is much greater. There has to be a heavy representation of players making the minimum amount of money. So you need the player at $420,000 backing up the player who's getting paid $13 million. So every second matters for those rookies who are not assured a roster spot. at their worst, even though I counsel players against this, they're sitting there and they've gone off to a training camp. Instead of that friendly, warm college coach who has been like an older brother who they've had through some growing years, they have an all business, tough as nails pro coach. So players very commonly will tell me, the only thing we hear from the coaches is getting criticized. We hear nothing complimentary. That's rough. And then being taken to a place where it's just men, it's all male, it's all competitive, testosterone is running high, that can be disconcerting. For any player that's not guaranteed a starting job, it's nervous Nelly time. For any player who is not sure that they'll be on the roster at all, it's a fight for survival.
We want to thank everyone once again for listening to and downloading Leigh Steinberg on sports. You can find us on sportsusamedia.com, Podcast One, that's podcastone.com, on iTunes and the TuneIn app for your smartphone. And don't forget to check out Leigh's website, steinbergsports.com, and follow him on Facebook and Twitter at Leigh Steinberg, and follow at Inside Sports USA. Do you want to say anything to the fans before you sign off?
Are you ready for some football?
I think we are. And until next time, this has been Leigh Steinberg on Sports.
So long.
This is Leigh Steinberg on Sports.